Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, I'm Michaela Ferrari. I'm the coordinator of the LA County Perinatal and Early Childhood Home Visitation Consortium. And we have been working with Connie, who is a consultant for HACLA, to try and put together this presentation about how to help your clients and families that you work with register for the Section 8 waitlist. As I mentioned, because we have so many attendees anticipated, we have muted all of you, but you can use the chat box, which is at the very bottom of your control panel, to type questions in, and I will bring those questions up to Connie at the end of the webinar. You also can raise your hand, and I can unmute you, but I would recommend going the route of the chat box. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Connie, and you can walk us through how to register for the for Section 8 waitlist.
Sure. Thank you so much, Michaela. And it's a pleasure to meet you via webinar. Please excuse my technical inexpertise. I'm actually quite horrible with computers. So if you have any issues with regards to the PowerPoint presentation that we're going to take a look at, and we're actually going to show you the website that you can go to apply, just let me know and type in your message through the chat box. I'm really appreciative of this opportunity to speak with you because, as you know, it's been a very, very long time since HACLA has reopened their Section 8 waiting list. The last time that this happened was in 2004, and so we do anticipate that given the affordable housing crisis here in LA, that there's going to be a lot of need and a lot of applications coming through. And so as we're going through the PowerPoint presentation, I'll explain what the application looks like, as well as what the process will look like as well. Lastly, I do want to say thank you so much to Michaela and to everybody on this call for your partnership. I think this is going to be really important for our community members. And so I thank you so much for making this time for me and for allowing me to present. Okay, so without further ado. Okay, great. So this is what we're going to talk about today. Basically, what is Section 8? What is a waiting list lottery for Section 8 for HACLA? How to complete the online application with regards to this lottery, what will happen after, and then also additional information and resources that are also available for folks who have difficulty finding affordable housing here in LA. I do know, yes, so Michaela, I did see from Patricia that there is a question about getting the PowerPoint email. This will be provided to you after the training.
Thank you. So we're also recording it, so we'll post it online and we'll share the link to view it as well.
Okay. So what is Section 8? Section 8 is essentially a federally funded program that provides essentially rental subsidies to low-income households and individuals. It basically provides them with this rental assistance to allow them, it gives them a voucher to go to a private landlord and to get their rent subsidized. So usually it's a complicated, and I'm not a housing specialist, it's a complicated calculation, but usually what happens is that HACLA would pay for about 70% of your rent, and then the participants who have the voucher will pay about 30%. Basically, once you do have the voucher, you can live wherever you can. I think within the first year, it would have to be within HACLA's jurisdiction, but you can use that voucher anywhere you go, just as long as you meet the income requirements and the household requirements, from what I understand. So any rental unit would need to be approved by HACLA to make sure that it's livable and that the rent itself would be reasonable and affordable to the family in order for you to use voucher. I do want to highlight this chart that is at the bottom, because this will have implications to the application process. As you can see, based on the household size, there are income limits that are applied here. And so with regards to the application itself, and I'll highlight it later on in my presentation, these will be the limits that will be applied that will allow somebody to submit an application as opposed to not. So as I mentioned, the waiting list has been closed since 2004. HACLA administers about 50,000 vouchers. I do want to emphasize that no new vouchers are going to be provided as part of this process. Really, it's, as people are cycling out of the program where, for example, they move to another area of the country, they're no longer income eligible, but they've been able to kind of stand up on their feet and provide their family for themselves and for their families again. As essentially attrition happens and as voucher becomes available, people will be called in for eligibility interviews. So really what I want to emphasize is this waitlist lottery is essentially a pre-application process where people can see if they make it onto the waiting list. If they do make it onto the waiting list, then they'll be called for an eligibility interview. And then thirdly, if they're deemed to be eligible, then they would be able to get that voucher and then use it to secure housing for themselves. So why is HACLA opening up their waiting list? Well, they're actually at the very bottom of their waiting list right now. So they tell us that by the end of the year, the current list will be exhausted. So last time when it opened up in 2004, about 200,000 folks applied, and they put everybody on the waiting list. So it took about 13 years for them to make it through that list. So I do want to emphasize, HACLA will be exhausting that waiting list first. So if you have clients who are waiting to hear still back from HACLA, they will get that notification first before, and they do not need to reapply for the new waiting list. They'll be called in before this new waiting list is used and people are called in for eligibility interviews. So if you're in front of a computer right now, the website is already public, hacla.hcblist.org. There will be a waiting list opening period. So anytime, 24/7 during the times that are posted on this, from October 16, 6 a.m. to the 29th at 5 p.m., anybody will be able to apply, okay? There's a how to apply video, but it's a little long and frankly a little boring. So I would encourage you to take a look at this when you do have time, but the link is right there. So let me actually show you the live website really quickly and escape out of this. So as you can see, this is the website itself. I do want to point you to a number of resources that are here. There's a how to apply video that you can click on. And what I'll do is I'll actually link to a YouTube site where you can see the video in English, and then there'll be captions in 6 different languages, okay? Secondly, there's frequently asked questions that are available. And you should, this list will actually be continually updated as we are kind of fielding questions from community members. And so please be sure to kind of go and take a look and about this. Michaela has also received a number of other resources from us, and I'm sure she'd be happy to share those with you. But we do have the FAQs as well as the flyers and whatnot in paper formats for you to print out as well, and I'd be happy to provide that. Lastly, we do have a map that really highlights specific places where people can get assistance. And so I know a lot of you will be helping your clients directly, but we do have other places as well that will be providing this information. So places that will be providing free computer and internet access, places, mostly the library system, that will be helping folks set up an email address, which is going to be a mandatory thing. There are some contingency plans, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then thirdly, for those who really need that free access, and then also application assistance. Okay. I do want to highlight here as well, as you can see, it is available in other languages, and the application itself will be available in English, as well as Spanish, Tagalog, Korean, Chinese, Russian, and Armenian. There's also a call center that people can also call if they have language competencies that are outside of these 6 or 7 languages, as well as for folks with persons with disabilities, if they have difficulties in terms of submitting an online application, they can also call into the call center as well, and we can talk about that some more. Okay, let me go back. So just to highlight, this is the application portal. The application itself will go live, and there'll be a link on that website that I just showed you, in which you will be able to submit an application starting at 6 a.m. on the 16th. I already highlighted that you can select them in different languages, as well as the frequently asked questions and the email set of classes. One of the things that I did want to highlight here is that anybody can apply with any mobile device. So if you have a smartphone, you can apply and submit an application. If you have what is it called? A tablet, you can also use that to submit your application. One thing that I did want to highlight here with regards to the services locator is that the mobile version will have the closest locations to you per your GPS location. And so unlike what you see on the screen about with regards to the ability to type in your address, on the upper right-hand side, the mobile version will basically locate the closest assistance centers based on where you are physically. And so I did show you that you can really click on that question mark there to figure out and to sort out where the specific assistance centers are that will be providing services in the 3 ways that I mentioned. So yes, how to apply video. I already talked about that as well. So let's talk about the application. I do want to highlight a number of things with regards to the application. There will be blue circles with question marks if you have any specific questions as to what the application will look like. There is no save application function to this portal. So for example, let's say your computer freezes, or you are in a public space and you're a little nervous about having your information shared. You can always close that session on the portal and then actually restart your application. So there is no save function. I do want to highlight that it's really for a one-time submission process. Lastly, in terms of for security reasons, the system will log you out after 30 minutes of inactivity as well. And so as you're assisting your clients, please keep that in mind. So let's go to the page 1 of the application. As you can see, some of the mandatory items here are your email, your phone number, your first name, your last name, and your date of birth. And then there's also kind of a reCAPTCHA security feature that is there. So as I mentioned, an email will be mandatory for this process. That being said, so we are having, per the service locator, a number of libraries, actually all the libraries within the city system have stepped up to offer those services and to set up email accounts for folks even today. So if you have any clients that would like to get assistance with that matter, they can go to any library branch. Some of the branches will have dedicated classes specifically for the Section 8 application process to help them set up an account. The phone number is going to be mandatory, and this is for folks kind of as a backup mechanism for individuals that would need some additional follow-up if they make it to the waiting list and then are called in and they don't confirm via email that they received this information. So the phone number will be a backup for that process. And then your first name, last name. For a lot of your Spanish speakers, I know that people have 2 last names. It'll be fine to type in here as well. The other thing that I did want to highlight is that if you are a caseworker and you have multiple clients that could benefit from this voucher, you actually could use your same email address and submit application on behalf of multiple clients that you have. And so with regards to that process, there's actually going to be other verification systems in place on the back end that would verify that it's not a duplicate application, but that it is for individual folks that you are helping on separately with regards to submitting the application. So this is the next page, the head of household. So as you can see, the personal information of the head of household will be required. One of the things that I do want to highlight is that the only information that will be captured in terms of a person's information will be the head of household information or the co-head or spouse of the head of household. In terms of children, other folks that are living within the household, that information in terms of their names, their, whether they have citizenship status or not, et cetera, will not be asked. It's really the only information that will be captured is for the head of household as well as the spouse or co-head. Let's see, So let's talk about each of the boxes that you'll see here. So ethnicity, Hispanic, non-Hispanic, prefer not to disclose. This information is purely for demographic reasons. It will not have any effect on whether a person would make it onto the waiting list or not. Same with sex. If they prefer not to disclose this information, it will not be used to determine eligibility and will have no weight within the process. In terms of citizenship status, so one thing that I do want to emphasize is that if you are undocumented, as long as you have one family member or one household member within your household that does have legal status, let's say a green card or they're U.S. citizens, then they can affirmatively apply for this lottery, to be part of this lottery. The lottery is a confidential process, and HACLA has told us, and this is also reflected in their FAQs, that they will not be sharing this information with any other federal agency, state agency, or local agency. That being said, in terms of the information that will be asked, so if you are a U.S. citizen as a head of household, they will ask for your Social Security number. If you are a legal resident, meaning, let's say you are a green card holder, they will ask for your alien registration number. If you are a non-legal resident, no information will be required. So for example, let's say you have two undocumented parents and your minor child is a U.S. citizen, they will not ask for information of the minor child. What will be verified, and we'll see this later on in the application, is that they'll ask you what your household size is. And so just as long as the household size would allow for the possibility of somebody else in your household having legal status, that'll just be that, okay? Same with race. Really, it's going to be used for statistical purposes, and you can check as many boxes as you'd like. And with regards to disability status, also again, not used to determine eligibility. However, from what I understand, that the amount of assistance may be affected depending on whether that person had a disability or not. And really, all those documentation would be verified at the eligibility stage. There are no documentation requirements that are attached to this pre-application. So as I mentioned, if you have a spouse or a co-head, the same information in terms of their contact information, their citizenship status, et cetera, will be asked of them. And just to clarify, a spouse is somebody who is a marital partner, and a co-head is for somebody who is legally responsible for the lease. So for example, a roommate, where you're equally responsible for the rent that you owe. The contact information will also be asked of the applicant. So I do want to highlight here, so we will be asking for the legal address as well as a mailing address of the individual who applies. The legal address will be used to, and I'll mention this later, for a local preference that will be applied in the randomized lottery. So two of the preferences that will be applied in the lottery are a local preference where if you live or work in the city of LA, then that preference would be applied and you would get essentially, I'm not sure how HACLA is specifically issuing that, working out that preference, but that would apply in this situation. And then secondly, if that person is a US veteran or a family member of a veteran, then they would actually also be able to get a veteran's preference in the randomized lottery. With regards to the legal address, if you are homeless, it is okay, perfectly fine to type in homeless in the current address box. However, because of the local preference that would be applied, the city, the state, and then just any applicable zip code would be required in order to submit the application. For a mailing address, they will be accepting a PO box. So, for example, if you have a a person who has suffered from domestic violence and does not want to share their information as to where they currently are, a PO box will be perfectly fine as well. Most communications really will be via email by HACLA. In terms of getting notification, whether they made it onto the waiting list or not, that will be a notification via email unless a person, for example, calls into the call center and then requests affirmatively for another way for them to be contacted. That will be the standard default. And then the mailing address is for those also who make it onto the waiting list and are called in for an eligibility interview. That will be the mailing address that will be used to send a packet of information requesting certain documentation, et cetera, for the individual. The mailing address really, just to emphasize, can be anything that would apply. So as an agency, if you are open to providing your address as that mailing address, that's something to think about. Or if the applicant has friends or family or churches or shelters that they want to also, send mail to, they're more than welcome to do that as well. With regards to the contact information, for some folks, there actually might be a USPS, a U.S. Postal Service verification that comes up, and so the person would essentially have a choice to leave the address as is or to populate with the updated information via USPS. And as I mentioned, if you have a spouse or a co-head, you can insert different contact information for them. And if not, then it'll just auto-populate the same contact information with them, and you'd be able to move on in the application. So household information. HACLA's definition of a household is really the entire group of folks that live in a unit together. So anybody, the way that I like to define it is anybody who will be moving into a unit with you when you use your voucher, and a family relationship is not necessary. So for example, if you have a roommate, if you have, a friend who comes and lives with you, et cetera, they can count essentially as part of your household. In terms of household total annual income, it would be the income of all the family members combined. However, we'll see it in a few slides, some definitions as to what household income would be counted as opposed to what is not, okay? So as I mentioned, the chart at the beginning of the presentation that really outlines the income limits, those will be applied in this pre-application process. So if a household has an income amount that is larger than what that chart says for that household size, they will not be able to move forward in the application. That being said, they can still go back, change that amount, and use a different income and correct that information. So some of the household information that are common sources, household income that are common. Wages and salaries, of course. If you're self-employed and you have a net income amount that comes from a business or profession, Social Security or disability benefits, if you have unemployment, TANF or any other welfare assistance payments, alimony or child support, and pay and allowances to a member of armed forces would all be, common sources to anticipate in terms of what that household income amount would look like. What is not included are, for example, inheritance or insurance payouts, payments received for foster care for children or adults, the income of a live-in aid, or food stamps. And so the link that I'm showing here really has a very comprehensive definition of what counts as annual income versus not. So I would encourage you to go to that website and get more information as you see fit. So additional questions. The user will need to answer the questions that are outlined here in order to submit their application. And really, it goes to those two preferences that I talked about in the randomized lottery. So the local preference, which is, do you live or work in the city of LA? Or secondly, are you or a member of your household a veteran of the US military? And so these questions will be used within the randomized lottery process, and so will be mandatory as a result. And then lastly, what is your primary spoken language? So this will help to determine, what the languages future communications by HACLA will be in. Yes. Lastly, there will be a certification and submission process. And so the user will have to verify the accuracy of the information. And then they'll also get a printout of the summary of the responses for the application itself. And so if you have a printer there, I would highly encourage the applicant to print it out and have it for their records. There will also be a confirmation number that will be on this last page. And it'll be both at the top and the bottom of the last page. And this number can be used to go to the HACLA website to verify if they made it onto the wait list or not after December 1st. They can also use this confirmation number to call into the call center after December 1st to verify that information as well. As you can see, this application is really quite short. It's a pre-application. There's no documentation requirements that are attached to it. And, I think it might be difficult for some folks, definitely for those that you help, but on average, CVR, which is essentially the application tech provider with regards to this project, tells us that it takes about an average of 5 to 8 minutes to complete the application. There will be no preference applied, really, in terms of whether you apply at the beginning of the open application period or at the end. It's really just those two preferences, the local and the veterans, that will be used in terms of helping to determine if a person made it onto the waiting list or not. And so you can apply at 1 a.m. You can apply at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. You can apply on the first day or the last day. It really will not matter at all. So as I mentioned, there is a call center that will be available from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., actually all day. So Saturday, Sunday will also be included to help people submit their application through the call center. So for example, if you do have a disability need or you have a language assistance need that's outside of the 6 languages that I mentioned, you can submit your application over the phone. The call center has access to interpreters that speak over 200 languages. And for those who have hearing or speech disabilities, they can use the California Relay Service by dialing 711. And those are really the two numbers that can be used with regards to the call center. One is toll-free and one is a local number, but they will all go into the same queue, okay? So what happens after an application is submitted? So as I mentioned, there is a confirmation number that people will receive, and they'll receive that email confirmation with that number via email as well. After the waiting list application period closes, HACLA will conduct the randomized lottery. Because there's such an anticipated need here in LA, we do anticipate more than 600,000 applications being submitted. And that is the number of folks in our city that are eligible for these vouchers. Out of whatever applications are submitted, 20,000 folks will be randomly selected for the new waiting list. HACLA actually tells us that as early as February of next year, they anticipate pulling people in from the new waiting list to conduct their eligibility interviews. So that as a result, not everybody is going to be guaranteed on the waiting list. And really, it's like I said, those two waiting list preferences that will have priority for selection. Oh, just to go back, with regards to veterans, they do have a requirement that the person be discharged with a status other than dishonorable. And so, yeah, just wanted to highlight that as well. So by December 1st, all applicants will receive notification that whether they were made selected or not for the waiting list, and they can really go to the website to check this information with their information or call the call center. That being said, if they lose their confirmation number, the call center will be prepared to ask a series of identifying questions to make sure that they locate the right application and are able to relay the correct information to them. So even if your client, for example, forgets that confirmation number or loses it, that'll be perfectly fine. Please have them still call into the call center, and they'll be asked a series of questions, and then they'll be able to get verified as to whether they made it onto the waiting list or not. And as I mentioned, there are no new vouchers that are attached to this opening. It's really as funding becomes available, the HACLA will reach out to people to call them in for the eligibility interviews. The reason why they came to the 20,000 number was because they actually wanted this list to last about 5 to 6 years instead of the current 13 years that it's taken for them to work through their old list. It could be up to a wait of 10 years, but I think for HACLA, they have highlighted that they want to really exhaust that list within 5 to 6 years. Please emphasize this with your clients. There is no cost to submit the application. Nobody from HACLA will ask for any payment. And there will be, aside from those two preferences, no guarantee, no improving their chances, no insurance that people will be able to get any type of preference to get any HACLA benefits. And so if you do hear of situations in the community where anybody is claiming that they can help applicants in these ways, or if there's a, for example, shadow website where people will be asked to submit this application, please tell them not to share any personal information. This will be the only applicant portal that's associated with this waitlist opening. And so any other portal or a website or Facebook page or anything that highlights any information that would be different from this is false and fraudulent. So I do want to highlight some other resources that are available. So this HACLA is opening up their regular Section 8 waiting list, but there are other programs that HACLA has in which people can get access to a voucher. So there are, one of the programs that they have is through the coordinated entry system, which I'm sure a lot of folks have heard about, where if a person is in an emergency situation and needs access to housing now, that would actually be a faster way for them to get to a voucher, more so than this Section 8 waiting list process. There are also public housing units as well that HACLA administers, and so each housing unit, from what I understand, has a different waiting list that they administer themselves. And then lastly, there are other housing authorities that do have waitlist openings as well. So for example, last week, Compton just opened up their waiting list for about 3 days. So the website that I highlight below, affordablehousingonline.com, has a list of waitlist openings all across the country that people can apply for. And so, yes. So that's basically the end of my formal presentation. I'd love to kind of have a discussion with you as to any questions that you might have. And so, yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity once again.
Great. Thank you so much, Connie. We do have quite a few questions, so I'm going to go ahead and start at the top of the list in order that they were received. I think you have answered a lot of these, but I will go ahead and ask them again just to make sure everyone's on the same page. So we did get quite a few questions about whether or not the slides would be shared. We will be sharing the slides as well as a link to the recording of the webinar online. We'll be sharing that with all attendees and registered folks after the meeting. So you will be able to share that as well. The first question was, can non-citizens or people without Social Security numbers apply for Section 8? I know you have addressed that, but I will go ahead and let you answer it again just in case.
Sure, absolutely. So as long as you have one member in your household that has legal status, they can apply for this process. And once again, it is a confidential process, and this information will not be shared, at least with regards to the pre-application process. That being said, I do want to highlight that let's say somebody does make it to the waiting list and they go to that eligibility interview and are deemed to be eligible for a voucher, that information will be accessible by HUD. Okay, so that is something to highlight for your clients. But at least with regards to this lottery process itself, I would, you should not be self-censoring yourself if you do have that situation that I just described. As long as you have one family member who has legal status in the U.S. or a household member, actually, they can apply and try out for the lottery.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question was, will the application allow the last name to be hyphenated?
Yes.
Okay. One similar question, so if both the spouse and co-head are non-contending, so only the children are citizens, will it allow the application to be submitted?
Yes.
You said it does not ask for citizenship for children.
It will not. So as I mentioned, it's really in the household member size that will come into play. So if the two parents, for example, are undocumented, they will need to have, for example, at least 3 or more household family members, right? Or household members that would be described in the box that I showed you, where you describe what the total number of your household members are.
Okay. Next question is, so is the preference applied before the lottery? Does that mean that those that have a Los Angeles address and are a veteran will rise to the top of the list of the lottery list?
Right. So I think, I have to clarify this with HACLA, and I can share this with you later, Michaela. It would apply in one of 2 ways. So from what I understand, either the preference would be applied after the randomized lottery and those folks would make it up to the top of the list. I don't think that there will be a double preference that would be applied. So for example, if you are, actually, I don't want to misquote that. Let me double check that information and then I can get back to you on that specifically.
Okay. Okay. Next question is, does this apply to Antelope Valley?
So technically, anybody from anywhere in the U.S. can apply to this. And that's why the local preference will come into play. Antelope Valley, you can still apply, you just will not get that local preference unless you work in the city of LA.
Okay. Next question is, will the lottery process take place after the client has been placed on the waiting list?
No, the lottery process will take place after the open application period ends. So like whoever applies during those 2 weeks will be part of the lottery process to make it onto the 20,000 that make it onto the official waiting list, the new certified waiting list. I hope that made sense.
It made sense to me. An additional question again about immigration status, and I think that you just mentioned this, but just to be clear, you said that if the household doesn't have immigration documents, other members of the families need to write in the Social Security number. Where in the application do they need to add that information? Is it in the household form?
So aside from the information being asked of the head of household or the co-head/spouse, none of the Social Security numbers, none of the alien registration numbers, et cetera, will be asked of any other household members. It's really just those two folks that would be asked that information.
Okay. Another question about application area, but you just answered that. And let's see, can a single person on GR apply? I'm actually not sure what GR is.
I'm guessing that's general relief. So a single person can apply. So let's say even if they are a single person with an income of 0, as long as they meet the and I just saw a request for the income slides. Let me just switch back so that you can have that as we're speaking. So many slides. Okay, so as you can see, for a person of 1, a household of 1, they would need to be making less than $31,550.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, if someone is homeless, what do they put down for the address?
They will put homeless, but as I mentioned, they would need to still put the city, the state, and then any zip code that applies in the current mailing address.
Okay. How long does it typically take to complete the application online?
It takes about 5 to 8 minutes, but I anticipate for those, for example, who have the digital divide, it might take longer. So one thing I do want to highlight is that 30 minutes of inactivity will automatically boot you out of the system. So please keep that in mind.
Okay. Is the salary focused only on the head of household and co-head or spouse? Or if the applicant is a minor, do they need to submit income information?
So actually, I'm glad that you raised this question because there are only 2 eligibility requirements that are attached to this application. So number 1 is that as a household size, they would need to meet those income requirements per the chart that you see on the screen. Secondly, they have to be 18 years or older or an emancipated minor to submit an application. And so those are really the 2 eligibility requirements that would apply in order to submit a pre-application and to be considered in the lottery.
Okay. This one says, what is the average wait time for emergency Section 8? I'm not sure if that's the same as what you're talking about. Yeah,
so this is the regular Section 8 process. I do not have that information. I would direct you to HACLA. That being said, like I mentioned, for anybody who is in an emergency housing situation where they need housing immediately, I would direct you to, for example, the coordinated entry system. I would direct you to, for veterans, there's a program called VASH and other programs that they can get access to a voucher faster.
Okay. And then this one says, if someone doesn't have any pay stubs because they get paid in cash, are self-affidavits allowed?
So as I mentioned, there are no documentation requirements that are attached to this pre-application. In terms of that documentation, it would really be at the eligibility interview stage. So, so one thing that I do want to highlight is that if you make it onto the waiting list and you're called in for the eligibility interview, they will be assessing your eligibility at the time of the interview. So let's say you get called in 2020. for that interview. They'll assess your current income situation at that point in order to see whether you would qualify or not for a voucher.
Someone is requesting the slide with the additional housing resources on it.
Sure. Let's just do a quick run through of all the ends. Okay. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
No,
And
not at
another
all.
question says, are current Shelter Plus Care tenants recommended to apply for this?
I don't know. So as I mentioned, I'm not a housing specialist myself, but I think just as long as they meet those income requirements and they're over the age of 18 or an emancipated minor, they should really apply for this.
Okay. We are still getting questions about the slides. So yes, we will be sharing the slides, and also a recording of the webinar will be posted online, and I'll share the link to that. So you can definitely listen to the webinar again and review the slides. We also are still getting questions about the Social Security number. So if you could just clarify that one more time for us, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yes, so if you as a head of household or as a co-head or a spouse, you will be asked, if you are a U.S. citizen, right, you will be asked for your Social Security number. If you are a legal resident, you will be asked for your alien registration number. But that being said, if you do not have either, and I mentioned you have one family member or household member that does have legal immigration status, you can just put non-legal resident, and it won't ask for any additional information.
Okay, thank you. All right, any last questions from folks? Okay, good question. Is child support taken into account for income eligibility?
Yes, I believe so. So that is part of HUD's definition of household income per the slide that I showed you earlier in the presentation, and you'll have that on hand. But really, I would direct you to the HUD website that outlines all of, all different types of incomes that would count or would not count in order to get a more complete answer.
Okay, thank you. Last call for questions. And again, just to reiterate, I will be sharing the slides as well as an online link to the recording of the webinar. Okay, another question about the lottery process. It sounds like the preference is applied during the lottery process. So if you get 20,000 vets that live in Los Angeles, no one else would be uploaded.
That is not, I don't think that's correct, but I do want to clarify this with HACLA before affirming versus denying. So from my understanding from the last time, and HACLA is in conversation about this process, so, just so that you know, my understanding from the last time that we discussed, this may have changed, is that the randomized lottery would happen, and then those with those local preferences and the veterans preference would make it to the top of the list. That being said, I don't know if that's the most current information. So I will make sure that I get that question asked of HACLA, and then I will let Michaela know so that she can relay the answer back to you.
Okay. Clarification question, it said for minors they had to be emancipated, or what other category of minors?
Just emancipated minors or over the age of 18. Those are the, okay. Yeah.
Okay. And then just to clarify again, someone asked about LA County or City of LA for preference. It's City of LA.
City of LA, yes.
Question about whether or not there will be flyers shared. We do have those we can send to you, and specifically for families.
Mm-hmm.
Another question says, up to how much of the percentage of rent does a Section 8 voucher cover?
So as I mentioned, it's a complicated calculation, but it'll cover about 70% or so.
Okay. And then last question is, after the 20,000 are selected, no other names go on the waiting list?
No, no. So it's not going to be like 2004 where everybody made it onto the waiting list and they worked through that list of 200,000. They really want this list to last them for about 5 to 6 years, which is why they capped it at 20,000.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Connie. We really appreciate this. There's clearly a lot of interest. So it's great to be able to share this information. And as I mentioned, we will be sharing the slides, some additional resources that you can share with families that you work with. And we've also recorded the webinar, and we will put it online and send the link to the recording so that you can share that with your colleagues as well. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for attending.